Hi, second graders. Are you ready for chapter 5, maybe 6? We'll see how long it goes. All right, here we go. A stranger. The Aldens passed the jagged gray rocks and kept paddling. After 2 hours, they reached the narrow strip of land that separated Timberwolf from Catfish Lake. "We're going to have to carry the canoes for a little way," Henry said. "Is this what they call a portage?" Violet asked, pointing to the trail between the two lakes. "Yes, it's like a walking path," Henry explained. Carefully, Henry and Aunt Jane pulled their canoes up the shore of Timberwolf Lake. Henry took the tents, sleeping bags, and waterproof bags out of the canoes. Jessie strapped the paddles inside them. Together, Henry and Jessie lifted the front of one canoe. With Jessie's help, Henry swung the canoe up over his head and then walked the short distance to Catfish Lake. Jessie helped Aunt Jane carry the other canoe. Benny and Violet followed, carrying one of the tents between them. Once Henry and Aunt Jane had secured the canoes at the edge of Catfish Lake, they went back to get the rest of the equipment. "Our campsite should be at the end of the path," Henry said, looking at the map. The others were busy repacking the canoes with all the gear. "I think that might be the trail," Aunt Jane said. She pointed to a dirt road that veered away from the walking path. "Let's follow it," Henry said, shouldering his backpack. The others took their backpacks, and Jessie brought another small bag of food. "Let's leave the tents and the canoes for now," Henry said. "I think there may be cabins at this campsite." Thick oak trees grew on each side of the path. Their leafy branches met in midair, shading the trail. Aunt Jane and the Aldens had not gone far when they spied a canoe hidden in the underbrush. "Look, another canoe!" Benny sounded very excited. "Do you think it belongs to Lorenzo?" "I don't know." Henry seemed doubtful. "We're a bit far from Lorenzo's cabin." "That's good," Benny said. "He scared me a little." "What if he's one of the coin burglars?" "Oh, Benny," Violet said, "we have no proof of that." "Well, he did act pretty nervous," Benny reminded her. At a bend in the trail, the Aldens saw a wooden lean-to. "We get to sleep in a house tonight," Benny said, skipping toward it. "I smell something cooking." Jessie sniffed the air. "There may be other canoeists here." I'll show you the picture. No sooner had Jessie spoken than a red-haired man limped over to them from behind the lean-to. The man wore a green flannel shirt, blue jeans, and only one sneaker. His other foot was bound up in a towel. "Did you hurt your foot?" Benny blurted out. "Yes," the camper said. "I twisted my ankle in a large hole outside the lean-to this morning. The strange thing is I never noticed the hole there before." The man spoke in a clipped British accent. Oh, I wish I could do the British accent. I would do it for you if I could. Aunt Jane and the Aldens looked at each other. They were not the only ones noticing mysterious things on the canoe trail. "Is that your canoe back there on the trail?" Jessie asked. "And is that your food we smell cooking?" Benny asked before the man could answer. "Yes to both questions," the man replied, laughing a little. He introduced himself as Rob Wilson. Now, second graders, if there was a glossary in this book, remember Mrs. B's been teaching about glossaries. It's a little dictionary in the back of the book. I think lean-to, which is right here, would be in that glossary. Do you know what a lean-to is? It's kind of like a little, sometimes a whole little building, or maybe just a couple walls and a roof that are attached to another building. So maybe it was on the side of a cabin. And maybe they'll show us a picture of it in a little bit. We'll see. All right, so this man is Rob Wilson. "I had to leave my canoe on the path because I couldn't carry it with my twisted ankle," Rob explained. "We could move it to the lake for you," Henry suggested. Thank you, Rob said. That would be very helpful. I was planning on canoeing down Catfish Lake, but now I'm too sure. Oh, I'm sorry. But now I'm not too sure of my plans. I may stay at this campsite a while longer until my ankle gets better. I don't know how you can manage, Aunt Jane shook her head. It's hard enough to canoe alone without a twisted ankle. Yes, nothing's gone right since the beginning of my trip, Rob confided. What do you mean? Henry asked right away. Well, the sprained ankle was the main thing. He suddenly grew quiet, almost as if he were afraid he'd said too much. Are you on vacation? Benny asked him. Not exactly, Rob answered. Jessie noticed he wanted to change the subject. Have you been on this trail long? She asked. No, only 2 days, he said in his clipped speech. Suddenly, he turned away. Oh, please excuse me. I must take my fish off the grill, he said quickly. After removing the fish, he packed his food in a basket and limped into the woods. Where's he going with all that food? Benny wondered. Shh, Benny, he might hear you, Violet said. Maybe he just wants to eat in peace. Not reading very well today. Sorry about that. Aunt Jane and the Aldens ate their macaroni and cheese dinner outside the lean-to, which they would be sharing with Rob Wilson. Do you think we scared him away by asking him all those questions? Jessie asked. It's hard to tell, Aunt Jane said. He did seem friendlier at first, before we asked him about his trip. Everyone we've met seems to have something to hide, Henry observed, thinking of Lorenzo Espinosa and now Rob Wilson. Well, at least Rob Wilson isn't warning us to stay away from this lake like everyone else is, Violet pointed out. Yes, he's even going in the same direction we are, Jessie said. He must not think Timberwolf Lake and Catfish Lake are dangerous. Do you think he's trying to solve the riddle, too? Benny asked. I don't know, Henry said. We really don't know anything about him yet. I don't think we should tell him too much. Can't we tell him about the riddle or the coin robberies? Benny wanted to know. No, I think we should first find out why he's on this trail. Henry sounded firm. Henry, it's not like you to be suspicious of everyone, Aunt Jane remarked. But I agree. It's best to be careful. Rob had not returned by the time the Aldens were ready to go to sleep. I hope he doesn't snore, Benny said. He lay inside his sleeping bag on the bottom bunk. Henry was in the top bunk, reading his book by the light of his flashlight. That's the least of our worries, Benny, Henry said. Benny gulped. Do you think Rob Wilson is a burglar? He motioned across the room to Rob's empty bunk. Rob had left a large backpack and 2 fishing poles on top of his sleeping bag. I don't know what to think about Rob, but he's probably all right. Henry tried to sound comforting. I hope we won't hear any wild animals tonight, Benny said sleepily. I hope not, Benny, Henry said softly. He looked down and saw Benny's eyes were closed. It never took Benny very long to fall asleep, no matter where he was. One more chapter? All right, the storm. Nothing unusual happened that night. Everyone slept well, even Rob Wilson, who must have returned very late. He came limping out of the lean-to in the middle of the Aldens' breakfast. May I join you? Rob asked. They nodded, and he sat down beside Jessie. Although he still limped, he said the swelling on his ankle had gone down. This is the first good night's sleep I've gotten since my canoe trip began, he confided. He poured some orange juice from his thermos and offered some to the Aldens. They shook their heads. They were drinking the hot chocolate Jessie had made. It was cold in the mornings, and the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. They had woken up early to prepare breakfast. Hot oatmeal with lots of brown sugar and raisins. Yum, that's one of my favorite breakfasts. Rob reached in his pack and pulled out a loaf of hard bread. He broke off a piece for himself and hungrily eyed the Alden's big pot of oatmeal. "Would you like some?" Violet offered, passing him a bowl. "Thank you. I'll only take a little," Rob said. He ate his portion quickly. "It's wonderful," he said between mouthfuls. "You must let me cook a meal for you before we leave this campsite." Aunt Jane and the Aldens looked at each other. Henry still could not decide whether or not to trust Rob. No one said much to him at breakfast. They were all too busy eating. "He does seem much friendlier today," Jessie remarked softly after Rob left to get his binoculars from the cabin. He wanted to do some bird watching. "Well, having a good night's sleep helps," Aunt Jane said. "He seems much more relaxed than he did yesterday." When Rob came out of the cabin, Benny was eating a second bowl of oatmeal. "So you're still hungry," Rob teased, poking Benny playfully in the ribs. Oh my goodness, I'm going to start that over. "So you're still hungry," Rob teased, poking Benny playfully in the ribs. Henry and Jessie exchanged glances. Why was Rob so friendly today and so quiet and secretive yesterday? The Aldens decided to stay another night at their comfortable campsite. They wanted to do some fishing and get to know Rob better. "I just wish he would tell us more about his canoe trip," Henry said. "What did he mean when he said nothing had gone right since he got on this trail?" "Well, we're not telling him too much ourselves," Violet reminded her brother. "That's true. Maybe he doesn't want to trust anyone either," Henry commented. "Oh, you'll probably win him over in time," Aunt Jane said. She was right. In the afternoon, Rob took Jessie and Henry fishing and helped them catch enough trout for dinner. By the end of the day, the Aldens had learned how to bone and clean fish, but they were still no closer to knowing more about Rob or his reasons for being on the canoe trail. Excuse me, I'm a little tired. "I think we should invite him to come with us," Jessie said at dinner. She leaned over her plate and took a bite of her fish. Jessie, Violet, Benny, and Aunt Jane were all enjoying fresh trout, rice, and a lentil salad Aunt Jane had prepared. She always ate healthy foods. Rob was with Henry cooking the rest of the fish over the coals. "Now that we know him better, that's a good idea," Aunt Jane agreed. "It would be hard for him to finish his trip alone with a swollen ankle. He wouldn't be able to push his canoe up to the shore by himself," Violet said. "Or push it out onto the lake," Benny added. The next morning, Aunt Jane, the Aldens, and Rob Wilson were up early. Rob was delighted to join the others for the rest of the trip. And there's the picture. He was able to pack most of the gear he needed in Henry and Violet's canoe. The Alden children moved the rest of his belongings to the woods for safekeeping. The sky was streaked with pinkish-gray clouds when Henry pushed the canoes out onto the water. "It's overcast today," he observed. Jessie looked at the sky before plunging her paddle into the water. She steered her canoe until she was alongside Henry's. The air felt very still. As they softly paddled their canoes in the calm water, they spotted wood ducks, meadowlarks, and 2 bald eagles. That'd be cool, wouldn't it? The eagles flew overhead together. With their wings spread, they were much larger than Benny. He stared at them, open-mouthed. What does that mean, open-mouthed? Kind of like you're going, wow, right? And your mouth is sort of hanging open. All the animals seemed nervous. The ducklings swam around their mothers, the geese honked, the meadowlarks twittered and flew around in circles. "There might be a rainstorm coming," Violet observed. "That could be why the animals are acting that way." "It may be too bad a storm," Rob said, glancing at the sky. Oh, I read that wrong. I'm sorry. "It may not be too bad a storm," Rob said, glancing at the sky. "If it were serious, the animals wouldn't be out at all. They would find shelter." Fog began to move in slowly. Henry noticed it was getting a little harder to see the shoreline. Violet watched the tops of trees disappear into a haze. To Aunt Jane, it seemed as if the water became grayer and grayer. "It's getting windy," Henry said to his crew. Small waves lapped against the canoe. Then suddenly the fog blew in with much more force. Soon everything was covered in a thick gray mist. "Maybe we should paddle ashore and wait until this fog lifts," Henry suggested to Rob and Violet. Even though they were sitting in his canoe, he could barely see them. He couldn't see the shoreline at all. And worst of all, he could not find Aunt Jane's canoe, which had been close beside his only a moment ago. "Jessie, Aunt Jane, Benny, can you hear us?" Henry and Violet called. There was no answer. Rob cupped his hands and shouted too, but their voices were drowned out by the sound of rain hitting the water. Luckily, it was a light rain, more like a drizzle, but it combined with the wind, which churned the water and shook the trees. I read that sentence kind of wrong too. Let me read it again. But it combined with the wind, which churned the water and shook the trees. Henry and Violet paddled in a big circle to see if they could find the others. They called and called into the fog, but there was never any answer. Aunt Jane's canoe had vanished. Oh my goodness, that's kind of scary. Well, next time I read, which will probably be Sunday, and I'll put it right on Seesaw right away, so you might see it on Sunday. Otherwise, for sure, you'll see it Monday, okay? You can be wondering, oh, weekend, what happened to Aunt Jane's canoe? Should I turn the page and see what the next chapter is called? Angela comes back. Who's Angela? I don't know. Well, there you have it, the Boxcar Children. Have a good weekend, everybody.